Okay, this is the next video in the DevNet Associate series of videos that I'm doing, and we're trying to learn just some Python basics so we can get our DevNet Associate certification. So learning Python basics, I recommend using, or the book that I've been using, is Python Crash Course 2nd edition by Eric Mathis. And in chapter 2, it covers basically variables. It introduces the concept of variables and simple data types. So I am not a professional YouTuber for doing Python programming or anything like that, so you'll have to bear with me. But I'm running Linux Mint here, and I've got a Mint terminal, and I also have a Sublime text editor, which we can use. We can use the terminal, or we could use a text editor to write some Python. So we're going to start off by just saying, okay, let's run the Python interpreter. So I'll type Python 3 and hit enter, and it opens the Python 3.8.2 interpreter, and we can print, let's say, we can print a string. So I'll print using Python. And that prints the screen, and you can see it prints it to the console, to the output. So this is a string. This is one of the data types, one of the simple data types that Python uses. We could also print integers. So I could say the number 100. And there it's printed. So this is this data type is a string. It's encased in double quotes or single quotes. An integer, which is like a whole number. Or we could have a float, or a floating point number, which would be a number like 1.2. Okay, we could also print a Boolean. So for a Boolean, I could do something like this. True. Right? A Boolean would be either true or false. Now those are just some of the data types that Python has. If we go to a website like w3schools.com, you can see I'm on the Python data types page. You can see there's all kinds of data types that Python has access to. Strings, integers, floats, complex numeric data types, lists, which is like an array, a tuple, range, a dictionary. There's a set data type, a frozen set. There's the Boolean, the bool. And then binary data types, bytes, byte array, and memory views. So there's a lot more than just strings, integers, and floating point numbers or Booleans. There's these other types as well, like a list, like an array. But we're just experimenting or just talking about basic data types and using variables. Okay, so let's this time take this string or a string and put it into a variable. So if I want to create a variable in Python, I just type the variable, the name of the variable. In this case, I'll say name. And I make it equal to, in this case, a string, and I'll say Guido van Rossum, who's the creator of Python. And so now I've created a variable named name, and the data type is a string. And then I can print out that variable. When you print a variable, you don't encase it in double quotes, because that's for a string. In this case, it's a variable, so I just put the name of the variable. And you can see that it outputs Guido van Rossum. Now, strings, or this variable has different methods that you can use associated with a string data type variable. So I could say print, and I could say name dot title, and I can put a little white space around this so it's easy to see. So you can see I'm calling the variable name, but I'm adding the .title method, or the title method. And now you can see that Guido van Rossum, that the G, the V, and the R are all capitalized. I could also take it to upper, use the upper method to take it to uppercase, or if I needed to, I could take it to lowercase. And it will output, the value of the variable in formatting it in these ways. If we're not sure of the data type that we're using, we can just put in the type function, or the type method, and then pass the variable. So our variable is name, so I'll say type, name, and then hit enter, and you can see it says that the data type for the name variable is the string class. So that's pretty good. All right, so what we're going to do now is let's switch over, and what we're going to do is we're going to use f-strings, or the format method, and use that to pass variables into strings. But to do that, let's use Sublime Text Editor. So I'll just take this Sublime Text Editor and let's save a file here. So File, Save As, and I'll just save it in Python work as test.py, and we'll save that. Okay, there it is. And what we could do is let's start off by saying, okay, this time we'll say first underscore name equals, and then the string Guido. And then last underscore name equals Van Rossum. However, I'm going to make that lowercase. I'll put the whole thing in between double quotes. And then we can say full name equals, and once again, I'm creating these variables on the fly. So in a lot of programming languages, when you create the variables, there's a thing called strict data typing where you have to declare whether the variable ahead of time is going to be a string or an integer or a floating point number or a Boolean or something like that. But in Python, you can just create the variable and then pass it a string value and it becomes a string variable, or pass it an integer value and becomes basically an integer-based variable. But you don't there's no strict data typing where you have to declare ahead of time what type of variable it is. All right, let's fix that, and let's make that lowercase. All right, and then full name, what we'll do is we're going to use the f-string method. So we say f and then the string. So the string goes between these double quotes, and then what we can do is we could pass variables into it using curly braces. So there's a set of curly braces and there's another set. And in between these double quotes, I could pass the variable name. So first underscore name, and you can see as soon as I start typing, it suggests a variable that I have available to me, and these suggestions are because we're using the Sublime Text Editor, which understands the Python programming language and then can do that. So you can see here full name, and then we've passed it in between the double quotes, we've passed it these two variable names. So let's try that out. And then next thing we'll say is, okay, and then we will print full underscore name. All right, now I will save this, file save, and then if we want to see it, what we can do is we could say, all right, Control B to build it. So Control B, and sure enough, there it is, Guido Van Rossum. Now let's see if we could pass it the variable name and then put in the title method. Title. Let's see if we can put that right in here off the fly. Right there. And then I'll just do a Control B. I don't even have to save, because when I do a Control B, which is Tools Build, it will automatically save the file and then run the program. And you can see it right here in the bottom of the window. And so this is using the Sublime Text Editor. And if you need the font to be a little bigger, what you can do is go to Preferences, Font, and you can go larger, and it'll increase the size of the font a little bit. Okay, other fun things that we can do is we could say, all right, print, and then we'll just put a string in here, Python, and we can do some fun things with strings. So we could say print Python, and then right here inside of our string, we could do a \t, and that should add a tab. And I'll do a Control B, and you can see there's Python in the output window here, down at the bottom here, but you can see Guido Van Rossum was printed aligned left, and Python had a tab. And if I say, all right, maybe another tab, we'll see if that works. And we'll do Control B, And there it is, it's tabbed over. And we could even put it on a new line. Let's see here, and Control B. And now you can see it's on a new line, but the tabs are no longer working because the new line was after the tabs. So if I wanted it to be on a new line and have the tabs, I'll say \n new line, then \t, and Control B. And you can see there it is. It's on a new line and it's tabbed twice over. So that's pretty cool. The other thing that we can do is we can strip. Another thing that we can do is we can strip white space from our strings. So for instance, if I have the string like this, Python like that, then I've included a space here. So let's see how that prints out. So right there, you can't see it in here. So to really play with this, you can't quite see it there. I'm going to go back to the Python console, the interpreter here, and I'm going to say, okay, favorite language equals, and then in quotations I'll put Python. And we'll just minimize this for right now. Now notice that if I now print, or if I say fav_lang, you can see when I call it, when I call the variable here in the interpreter, notice I didn't have to just print favlang, I could just in the interpreter just call the variable. You can see that it includes a single quote here showing that there's white space before the word Python and after the word Python. So that's because that the string had white space built into it. Right here, I put a space before I closed the double quotes. Well, we can strip that off by saying fav_lang dot rstrip, and that should remove the white space on the right, and you can see it did. And I could then do an lstrip to strip the white space from the left side. Notice that on the right it's still there because it switched over. Or we could say just strip, and it will strip all of the white space from the string, and it outputted it like that. Okay, the other thing that's covered in the chapter is basic arithmetic procedures. So you can, right here in the Python interpreter, you could say 4 plus 1, and it will output the result, 5. Now, I could also put that into a variable. I could say my num equals 4 plus 1. And if I do it that way, and then call my num, you can see the number 5. I can also do subtraction, 4 minus 1, and I get 3. I can do multiplication, 3 times 4. I can do division, let's say 5 divided by 2, and I get a floating point number, or a decimal. I can even use exponents. So I could say 4 to the second power is 16. 5 to the second power, to the second power is 25. Notice this error message. So it didn't like the input. It didn't like the standard input here of the question mark. It didn't make sense to it. And then it showed me where the problem was on the next line. It said there's a problem here. Notice the little caret there showing me where the problem was. All right. There's also order of operations in your arithmetic operators in Python. So in other words, if you say 2 plus 3 times 4, the result is 14. So 2 plus 3 is 5, and 5 times 4 is 20. However, 3 times 4 executes first, order of operations, or PEMDAS. So this is 12 plus 2 is 14. Now, another way you could solve that is by putting the 2 plus 3 into parentheses, and I'm putting spaces because it's considered good form, times 4. And you can see now 2 plus 3 executes first. We have 5 times 4 is 20. All right. Now, the other thing that is covered in the chapter is that you can add floating point numbers. So you could say something like 0.1 plus, let's say, 0.2, and you get a floating point number. However, sometimes this will be a simple floating point number, and sometimes you'll get this extra arbitrary decimal places, and the curriculum shows how to deal with situations like this, where you have 0.1 plus 0.2 and you get 0.3, but you're expecting just 0.3 and you get all these arbitrary decimal places. Now, if I was to do that same thing and use 0.2 plus 0.2, I get very cleanly just 0.4. So sometimes it's odd, the result, and the book mentions that. Okay, also, division, even if the division goes into, even if there's no remainder in division, for instance, 6 divided by 2 equals 3, but when you do division, it results in a floating point number. So that's another thing that's mentioned in the book, Crash Course on Python, in Chapter 2. If you take a floating point number and use it with exponents to the power of 2, the result will also be a floating point number, as opposed to if I just said 3 to the second power and get a 9. And there's some other things that are covered in the chapter that's pretty important. If you want to put a comment into your code, you use a hash, or sometimes we call that a pound sign, a hash. So this would be a comment. This is a comment. And if you put a line like this into your script, it won't get executed. Basically, the hash tells the Python interpreter not to execute whatever comes after the hash. So this is how you create a comment. You can also do multi-line comments. All right, a constant is also covered in the chapter, and a constant is in all caps. So, and this is just, so if you, in the book it says something like connections in all caps equals 5,000, and this is just a convention. So a constant is a variable that you write in all caps, and it basically tells other programmers that, and reminds yourself that this variable is not to change in the program. It should always keep the same value, as opposed to other variables which can change all the time. You're always changing them. All right, that's plenty of time for this Chapter 2 video. There are other topics that are covered in the book in Chapter 2. There's tons of great stuff. However, we've got to move on.